Hi, this is Bob Seitz, and this is Full of Years. Today I'd like to talk with you about an idea that I learned a long time ago in the meat business when I was a meat worker, and we had to make money by cutting apart cows and selling it to people who like to eat meat. And the phrase went something like this. You may know it if you were in business too. Pay now or pay later. Another way of saying it, your first loss is your best loss. In the meat business, it went something like this. If some piece of meat, something wasn't right with it, you could try to hide it or to fake it or whatever, but your costs later would increase when a customer returned that meat to you and said, hey, there's something really wrong with it. So your first loss was your best loss. You could pay now or you can pay later. I think it's an axiom for life too, and it has many dimensions for those of us who are old, myself included. Let me try to talk with about those a little bit with you now. And I'm sure some of this will be familiar. When you're young and you do what you do and you don't do what you don't do, you sometimes realize that maybe you should change your ways. Maybe you should floss, maybe you should save some money from your paycheck or from your earnings. Maybe you should spend a little more time with your kids. Maybe you should change the oil in your car when you're supposed to. Maybe you should fill in the blanks. But when you're young also, one of the things that you can think very easily, seems logical, is, well, I'll pay for this later. It won't matter right now. Other people will get sick if they do this, but I won't. And besides, I'm going to live forever, so what's the hurry in paying the costs, taking the consequences for this action or inaction? I get that. I lived that way when I was younger. There were times when things I did caused problems later. So paying now can be sometimes difficult. And it seems easier, perhaps even logical, just to say, I'll put that off. I'll not do the right thing because I won't have to pay for it now, and I'll pay for it later, and that won't be that hard. But, however, we're old now, aren't we? And because we're old, we're having to pay now, little by little, for what we didn't pay earlier. We're paying later now. Those of you who haven't flossed your teeth in years may be spending more time at a dentist than you want. Those of you who went to rock concerts with no ear protection are visiting hearing aid specialists. Those of us who didn't save enough money are living our later years in poverty. Those of us whose children were not our high priority when we were younger are dealing with perhaps fractured relationships with our adult children. The list goes on. You get the point, right? And paying now, paying later, because we are later in our lives, is kind of painful, isn't it? Because here's the truth of it. Paying later happens at a time in your life when it's tougher to do that. The body doesn't work as well. There isn't as much money. There's not as many people around. And so it costs more to replace all my teeth than it would have to buy a $2 thing of floss and to floss every night. Trying to repair my relationships with my children, who I didn't spend enough time with, can cost a whole lot more money and time and energy and psychic anguish than it would have to sit down and read with them when they were younger. And this happens in a time in my life when my resources, physical, emotional, spiritual, economic, are not that strong. So paying later, maybe you're doing that right now. Paying later is a tough thing at this time in our lives. So what to do about that? Bemoan it, gripe about it, whine, blame other people? Yeah, you could do that. I don't know that it's going to make anything better. Because finally, consequences have a way of standing there and waiting, don't they? Those teeth that don't work too well, they're not gonna just sit back and be kind. They're gonna complain. That hearing aid that doesn't work because your hearing is shot, it's not the hearing aid's fault. It's those years of listening to loud music or using a chainsaw. That would be me. So whining and carping and moaning isn't a way to take care of paying later. Bucking up, maybe, yeah, just taking it and realizing this is part of growing older, that you pay for the things you didn't do and the things you did do, and this is the time in life it happens. Yeah, bucking up might help. But there's some other ways of coping with it and dealing with this paying later phenomenon that might be helpful. One, it's called forgiveness. You're a Christian, you know about forgiveness. Forgiveness can be healing. It may not get rid of the consequences, but certainly asking God to forgive you for what you've done, asking for deliverance maybe, that can be helpful because it helps you to forgive yourself. If you didn't pay earlier and now you're paying later, one of the things you're doing is blaming yourself, and you're not liking yourself, and you're finding it hard to forgive yourself. So getting in touch with your ability to ask for forgiveness and seeking and finding it and getting it and using forgiveness, not a bad idea. Another one, you're older, so am I. For goodness sake, ask for help. Paying those consequences is tough. But there are people around us, there are people around all of us who can help us with that payment. It might be those kids. It might be the dentist or endodontist who's willing to give us a price break. It might be somebody who can come alongside of us as we go to the doctor to get help for conditions that we could have prevented. It might be a paid attendant or somebody at that assisted living facility whose job it is to ameliorate those conditions. So the questions of paying later can be calmed and mitigated by just asking for help. Well, it's this time in our life when paying later happens and consequences pile up. I hope yours aren't too deep, they're not too strong, they're not too overwhelming. And I hope you consider these thoughts. You can't pay now because you're paying later. It may be just a good thing to realize how dependent you are on other people and on God's grace.